This is my aunt's story. In the summer of 1975, my aunt was a college student here in Utah, and she went camping with her boyfriend and another couple up American Fork Canyon, a beautiful place 40 minutes south of Salt Lake City. It began raining really hard earlier that evening, and so most people left their campsites. When it stopped raining, my aunt and her friends made a campfire and got on with their festivities until after dark, when it started raining again. The other couple decided that they didn't want to camp in the rain, and so they left. My aunt and her boyfriend, my now uncle, huddled together in their tent and tried to get to sleep. But my aunt suddenly heard distinct footsteps not too far away from the tent. She sits up and listens. They're getting closer and closer. She sees a quick flash of a flashlight, which turns off again immediately. My aunt tells this as well. She always says that her first thought was that it was a park ranger coming to tell them that they had to leave due to flash flood warnings or something like that. So she called out, "Who's there?" The footsteps stopped. This woke up my uncle, and they listened for more movement. They both talk about how scary it was because it was hard to distinguish between footsteps from the sound of the rain. It was the middle of the night as well, up in the canyon with no one around for miles. They decided that if they heard anything spooky one more time, that they would leave. So they waited and waited, and finally they started falling asleep when suddenly they were woken up to the soft sound of their tent zipper slowly being unzipped. My aunt screamed, and my uncle jumped into action by grabbing his heavy metal flashlight and whacking the person on the other side of the tent door as hard as he could. Whoever was on the other side of the tent gasped when it was hit and ran off. My aunt and uncle ran like mad for their truck about half a mile away, and discovered quickly that the back tire had actually been slashed. They were able to drive somehow to a gas station a few miles out of the canyon still and call 911 at a payphone. The next day, they went to get all of their stuff with the police, who found male footprints all around their tent. They never did catch the guy, but here's the creepy part. None of this is proven, but it's a spooky thought. In the summer of 1975, several women went missing, and it's been discovered that was when Ted Bundy was living in and terrorizing Utah. And guess where they found some of the bodies? In some caves up American Fork Canyon, and only 1 mile away from my aunt's campsite. Only a week before my aunt went camping was when Ted did his thing and murdered one of his victims and hid her body in that area. It's also known that Ted Bundy was a necrophiliac and would return to visit his victims' bodies often. My aunt and uncle wonder if, perhaps that night, Ted was visiting his collection of bodies when he saw a prime opportunity and nearly took it and prowled around their campsite. Also, Ted Bundy has a distinct chip in his front tooth, and my uncle likes to joke that he gave it to Ted by whacking him with the flashlight. Now, all of this is speculation, of course, but doesn't that just kind of give you the chills? How close they were to being harmed in the middle of the night like that, in a campsite with no one around, and right next to where Ted Bundy's gravesite was. So this all happened roughly, I would say, 3 to 4 years ago, but the experience has haunted me almost every single day since it happened. I'll start off by saying that at the time I was pretty young, single, and very keen to have my first experience with a guy. I spent a while looking through dating apps, talking to a few people, until I finally came across a guy who seemed interesting and we had a lot of things in common, so I thought it would be a good idea to meet up with him since we'd been talking for almost a month at this point. Now, even though I was only young, I wasn't completely naive or stupid. I was and still am a very cautious and paranoid person, but for some reason that day I made what possibly could have been one of the worst decisions that I've ever made in my life. I invited him to come and spend the night at my place. My parents were away for the weekend and I had the place to myself, so it seemed like the perfect opportunity for him to come over. He lived around 3 to 4 hours away from my place, yet he was eager and almost desperate to come and see me. So he set off as soon as he finished work, which was around 11 a.m. The whole time he was driving to my place, I just had this sickening sense of doom, though, almost as if something was going to go very, very wrong that night. I almost texted him multiple times to tell him that I wasn't interested anymore, but I hesitated as he was only 10 minutes away by this point. And I jumped up as I heard his car pull up, and I expected to be greeted by a smile once I opened the door. But instead he just sort of pushed his way through and continued to stare at me blankly, all whilst my two French bulldogs snarled and growled at him, which they never ever do to pretty much anyone. And things instantly seemed extremely weird. He followed me quickly to my bedroom and didn't waste any time in aggressively undressing me, which I hesitantly went along with, as this was my first experience with a guy, especially as he was almost 6 years older than me, so I was pretty tense. But fast forward a couple of hours later, he suddenly asked me if he could sleep in my room, which confused me as it was only like 5 p.m, but I told him it was fine and I would continue to watch movies by myself downstairs. After an hour or two, I heard what sounded like furniture being moved around and the sound of him talking. So I made my way upstairs and opened my door to find him crouching in the middle of my room and breathing extremely heavily. When I asked if he was okay, he motioned for me to get on the bed, where he sat me on his lap and proceeded to place a blindfold over my eyes and put his hands around my neck lightly. Now, I was already feeling extremely uncomfortable, which worsened as he tightened his grip around my throat and said, "Does anyone know that I'm here? Do your friends know who I am or what I look like or anything like that?" I instantly answered, saying that my sister and friends who live nearby knew. This was a complete lie, mind you, as I don't have a sister and my friends were completely unaware about what was going on, but something inside of me just forced me to say it. After minutes of awkward silence, he just stood up to gather his things, and I noticed that in his backpack he had tape, rope, and handcuffs, which at first didn't concern me as I knew that he was into that stuff, but looking back, I think it was intended for something much, much worse. All of a sudden, though, he said, I think I'm going to go head home. I've got a long drive and I'm pretty tired." Well, I didn't hesitate to let him out of my door as I was already extremely uncomfortable. But as he left, he failed to make any eye contact or say goodbye, and he raced off down the street as soon as he got into his car. I ran back to my room to check if he had left anything, as he left in a hurry, and I found a note on my desk with the words, "Being nice is what saved you." At the time, I don't think I really realized what that note meant, but now that I think about it, I seriously think that he had very ill intentions towards me. I'm still angry at myself for even letting a stranger into my home, which is obviously a huge mistake, and I immediately blocked him on all of my social media after this, and I still beat myself up over it. And I know that I'm really lucky that I made it out of that one alive. All I know of him, though, is that he's now somewhere back in America. I don't really know why he was living in the UK at the time that I met him, but all I can say now is that I'm really glad that he is many, many miles away from me. When I was 17, I worked in a really large mall at Vans. I had a lot of creepy older guys come in and flirt with me, but one guy in particular took the cake. Now, one day, I was working the usual busy as heck Saturday nights, and there were 4 very tall men that asked for help getting some shoes. I worked in an outlet, so the store was large with tall racks. The mall that I worked in was extremely popular amongst locals and tourists alike. The mall has some history with being a sex trafficking hotspot for context as well. But anyway, the men said that they were from Nigeria, and honestly, they were pretty chill at first, until they began to flirt. One man kept saying that he was a son in Nigeria and asked if I wanted to wed him. I laughed because I thought that he was joking, but suddenly he looked extremely offended. I was awkward for sure and began talking about the shoes, but the man interrupted me with saying how great his son was and that I would make a great wife. And at that point, I grew uncomfortable because I didn't want to be rude, so I asked for a coworker to come over to take care of them while I went to the bathroom. And everything was normal for the remainder of the shift. I clocked out and I was waiting for my dad to come and pick me up. I usually walked around the halls of the mall as I waited. The music was soothing and all was calm. I walked past a restroom hall and saw figures standing in my peripheral. I glanced and saw that it was the 4 men from earlier. I began to panic at this, but I sort of just played it off. I smiled at them softly and kept walking so that they didn't think I was being rude. But sure enough, they began to follow me. I picked up my pace hoping to find other people walking around, but there was no one. I was speed walking, but the guys were definitely keeping pace with me, which troubled me obviously. My thoughts were to just go to the bathroom so that I could lose them, so I entered the next restroom hall. I walked slowly, thinking that I had lost them, but soon after, I heard pounding footsteps in a hurry. I looked back and they were there, coming right for me. I didn't think the bathroom was an option anymore, and I started yelling for help. I ran straight for the employee corridors of the mall, and right when I got through the doors, thank the heavens above, a security guard met me on the other side. I bumped into him, and I've never felt more relieved in my life. The men took off the other way instantly, and the guard let me stay in his office until my dad came. All I can say is I thank God for that guard, because if he wasn't there, I probably wouldn't be writing this right now. This occurred in 2017, and due to a multitude of factors, including a recent death of a close friend, I was unbearably depressed at this time in my life. For that reason too, my family flew across the country to visit me in LA, where I live. And we thought that it would be nice to visit Catalina Island. But when we arrived, it became apparent to us that it was the off-season pretty quickly. It was late November, the weather was cold, and as a result the island was nearly empty besides locals and a few straggling tourists such as ourselves. But our first priority was to ditch our luggage so that we could explore the island. So we immediately checked into our motel, though that word motel hardly does the place justice. I call it a motel because all the doors to the rooms exited to the outside, but in actuality our room was one of 20 to 30 quaint guesthouse-looking buildings, arranged in a sort of horseshoe shape around a walkway, with rooms on either side of the path. The entrance to the motel was essentially one of the points of the horseshoe, and if you walked dead straight, you'd reach the room where we were given, essentially on the corner before you have to go right to go further into the horseshoe. So, from our room, one path led back to the street, and the other further into the secluded maze of rooms. Stay with me here too, because this is important. So after a day of exploring and having just finished dinner, it was time for a cold, dark walk back to the room. The island is a decent distance from the mainland, and let me just say, it gets dark. Similarly dark was my headspace too after the dinner conversation took a left-hand turn and my overwhelming depression got the best of me. So I pulled my black hoodie tighter over my freezing ears and I walked ahead of my parents to the hotel room, telling them that I just needed to go to sleep. And I did, immediately. Depression sometimes makes that easy, and I was already losing consciousness as they entered after me, but I drifted off without so much as a good night. But I then woke up to my mum saying my name, a harsh whisper. The room had 2 beds, my parents' bed closer to the door and mine further into the room. But my mum's voice cut through the silence again, and she sounded concerned for me. I didn't blame her considering my mental state at the time. Groggily, though, I rolled over. "What?" I asked, as my eyes adjusted to the dim moonlight coming in through the curtains. I saw her turn to face me. She was surprised to see me in my bed. Her eyes got wide, because if I'm in my bed, then who the heck was she talking to? We both looked back to where she was previously looking to see hooded figure in all black just standing over their bed. Now, it's hard to define just how horrifically startling this was, to be on an island in the middle of the ocean and wake up to see a hooded figure just looming over you like that. This moment seemed to last forever, though. Life isn't like the movies, too, where characters unleash a blood-curdling scream or something like that. Sometimes the only thing that comes out is something panicked and guttural. And my mum's words became low and severe as she said my dad's name in a dire voice that I've never heard her use before. And then the hooded figure did something so bizarre and just truly unsettling. It didn't advance towards us, but instead crouched in the corner near where it stood. The way it crouched was so absolutely unexpected that even in regards to this already unexpected situation, it just terrified me. It seemed sort of animalistic, maybe. I knew two things, though. This hooded figure had definitely been standing over us sleeping, and it wasn't acting in any sort of way that I could understand as logical. As opposed to the infinite moment of this figure standing over us mere seconds ago, the series of events that unfolded when my hulking ex-military dad woke up happened in an instant. Suddenly, we were out the door, not knowing which way the intruder went. My mum was screaming, "Get him, get him." My dad was running down one path of the horseshoe further into the hotel, shouting through sheer adrenaline, "I'm going to kill you." I ran down the other path towards the street, and when I got there, not a sign of the intruder, but it became suspiciously quiet behind me. I ran back to the room to find my dad quietly walking back, his head low. He gets really close to me, and I hear him say, "It's a kid." The explanation? Some young teen, tall and lanky as I am in my 20s, wearing all black, including a black hoodie, went into the wrong room. Our room. The one time my parents just so happened to forget to lock the door. My mum woke up when he entered and, seeing a tall person in a black hoodie, thought that he was me, assumedly leaving the room in a depressive episode. And when the hooded figure crouched, that was him realizing his mistake and panicking, because he was terrified of us. As I got back to the room, my mum walked out and hugs this kid, who was now crying his eyes out. I would be too if a massive ex-soldier was sprinting after me with murder in his eyes. But in the end, he was okay, and so were we. But man, it was a fright, that's for sure.